They're nothing but pop garbage. Their songs are meaningless.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and welcome back to my Most Hated Bands series. This is where I look at bands that people hate, and I try to figure out exactly why people feel that way about them. Today, we're going to talk about 3 bands that have a lot of material to work with. We're going to talk about Trapt, Memphis May Fire, and of course, Imagine Dragons. And one thing, I want to be clear, the point of this series is not to laugh at the bands or mock them or anything like that, although sometimes that is kind of fun. There's a little bit of that, but that's not really the point. The point is to understand why, because I think anytime people feel this strongly about anything, there's always something to be learned from a marketing and consumer psychology perspective. Before I get into it, I want to mention 3 things. Number 1, if you haven't checked out the Punk Rock MBA podcast yet, please do that. There's a link to that in the description. Number 2, if you want to talk about business with me, connect with me on LinkedIn. There's also a link to that in the description. I've been publishing a lot of stuff over there that I think is pretty cool. And number 3, I want to thank everyone who supports the show on Patreon. Patrons get access to every podcast a week early. There's an opportunity for me to review your band or podcast or YouTube channel or whatever else you want to send my way. So if that sounds interesting, there's a link to that in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, let's start things off on a high note and talk about a band that's done more to damage their brand in a short time than pretty much any band I could think of since Lost Prophets. If you follow the rock news sites, and you've probably already seen the play-by-play of this, but for anybody who doesn't, the TLDR of this whole situation is basically this. As you may remember, Trapt is that butt rock band who had a hit back in 2002 with their song Headstrong, which you may have heard in some of those like fan-made highlight clips of the US military made by people who couldn't run a mile themselves but owned $2,500 worth of tactical gear. And they were pretty much off the radar for the past 17 years or so, until about a month ago when, for some reason, I'm not really clear why, Riley from Power Trip got into this like weird Twitter beef with the singer of Trapt about whose band was bigger. They spent a few days like tweeting back and forth about like how they played the same venue in Ottawa and arguing about who drew more people and who has more streams and stuff. That was weird enough, right? Like Power Trip and Trapt having Twitter beef in 2020? What? But then it got even weirder. For some reason, Tillian from Dance Gavin Dance got into it, again, getting into this like weird pissing contest about whose band was more popular. And in case that wasn't weird and awkward enough, Tillian took it to the next level and called the guy from Trapt a virgin. It must feel really good to be so relevant in the music scene after all these years pumping out hit after hit. I hope Trapt's consistent and smashing success will one day contribute to you finally losing your virginity. And then the guy from Trapt called him gay and threatened to beat him up. Oh, fuck you and you're totally gay as in happy band. You haven't had any hits. Oh, and Trapt kicks your ass on all streaming platform, you bitch. Come say any of this to my face. And then Tillian continues the pissing contest over whose band is bigger. Not that it matters, but on a yearly basis, we absolutely shred you in total streams, album sales, and ticket sales. You have inflated numbers on unique listeners because people listen to your one song and change it immediately. And it goes on and on like that. And I thought it was kind of funny at first, but by this point I was like, really? Guys in their 30s calling each other gay virgins and threatening to beat each other up? Like, really? We're doing this? And then even more people piled on. Franz from Attila pulling the I make more money than you card, patiently waiting for Mr. Trapt to tell me he makes more money than me because I know for a fact he certainly does not. I like that, by the way. I'm going to call him Mr. Trapt for the rest of this video. Pablo from Chelsea Grin chimed in, like really getting into the weeds about the capacity of some venue in Salt Lake City or whatever. And then Telly from The Word Alive chimes in with this: since Trapt keeps talking about how he has more money than literally everybody, how about you post a screenshot of that account balance? Ugh. And I could keep going because I think for the past month or so, pretty much any Warped Tour band has been doing the same thing, beefing with the Trapt guy on Twitter with Mr. Trapt, and then patting themselves on the back for dunking on him or whatever. And I get it. The guy's obviously a total douchebag, acting like a complete asshole, but really, is this what we should be doing with our spare time? I mean, you know it's gotten really out of hand when fucking Ronnie Radke, of all people, is the one to step in and say, okay guys, I think we're getting a little bit petty here. I mean, if Ronnie Radke is the voice of reason in any given situation, there's a problem. But this ain't petty, right, Telly? Only when I express my concerns about topics I feel should be addressed. Should I pull the can't we all just get along card too, LMFAO? And that's pretty much how I feel about it. Obviously, Mr. Trapt is acting like a complete asshole, but this whole pissing contest about whose band is bigger and arguing over the minutia of venues and streams and all that stuff, kind of embarrassing. I think this is a great example of letting yourself sink to somebody else's level when really the right move would be to just walk away from the situation. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I can speak from experience on that, because there's been quite a few times over the past couple years where I've gotten in one of these similar stupid kind of pissing contests with some commenter and I forgot all about it, and then a couple months later I was looking through comments and I found the thread and I read my replies and I was like, what the fuck was I doing? Like, why did I let myself get sucked into that? Honestly, this whole thing is a mess, and I think everybody involved with it looks bad. That said, there are two super funny things about this that I want to point out. First of all, I absolutely love Mr. Trapt's fixation with Pandora. Every time one of these bands calls him washed up and points out their Spotify numbers or whatever, the first thing he always does is trot out, well, we've got this many people on Pandora. Like here, where he's boasting about how they're bigger on Pandora than My Chemical Romance is. They've never had a hit as big as Headstrong. If they did, what song is it and what was its peak position on the top 40 charts? On Pandora, we absolutely murder them. This one is my favorite, and not to get political here, but I just couldn't help but read this in Donald Trump's voice. Who cares about paid subscribers, man? Richer, more affluent Americans than use Spotify use Pandora as a radio station. Again, the whole thing is kind of embarrassing, but I have to kind of admire his dedication to Pandora. Can't wait to hear how well they do on Friendster and Orkut. And like I said, this has been going on for about a month now. This is the middle of April 2020. But the good news is I think the end may finally be in sight. And what makes me say that? Well, it's one thing to come at the guys from, Dance Gavin Dance or The Word Alive or Chelsea Grin. You don't have anything to worry about there other than maybe a few snarky tweets. But Mr. Trapt made the unfortunate mistake of getting into it with the one guy in all of music that I would say you absolutely do not want to get into it with, Ezek, aka Danny Diablo from Scarhead and Crown of Thorns. There's several other tweets in this exchange, but here is my favorite part. Mr. Trapt says, I don't give a fuck who respects me. You tried to be so different that you ended up the same as all the rest of the tattooed gauge queens out there. You are desperate to fit in. No originality in you. And Ezek's reply pretty much says it all. What the fuck are you talking about? Ask around who I am, then you will be silenced. Have a good day. So what does he mean when he says ask around about who I am? Well, if you know who Ezek is, then you already know the answer to that, but in case you don't, here's what the guys at Metal Injection had to say. Diablo almost died after a 1993 fight where he was stabbed with an 8-inch screwdriver. Despite that, he was almost charged by the court because of the beating his attacker took. In 1998, he was arrested for attempted murder. This guy is no joke. Anyway, to me, the bottom line is this, that when it comes to getting involved with online drama, or really drama of any kind, the old 80s movie War Games said it best.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.
And next up, Memphis May Fire. And for anybody who may not be familiar with them, they were one of the bigger metalcore bands of that whole peak Warped Tour era. Their album in 2014, I think it was, actually went to number 4 on Billboard, which is insane to think about now. Like a metalcore band charting at number 4 on Billboard. And if you haven't heard them, they sound like this. Nothing super special, but definitely better than average. They had some catchy parts. And like a lot of bands from that era, they were a Christian band and they did what I would call the savior core thing, where all these scene bands sort of positioned themselves as these inspirational figures that were here to save you from the darkness of self-harm and depression and whatever else. Don't worry, because the singer of your favorite metalcore band is here to help, which sounds cool on paper, right? But in reality, I think a lot of that was just straight up phony, very insincere and manipulative of a young fan base that didn't know any better. Chris Motionless actually put it really well in this Tumblr post he made back in 2013. 8 out of 10 bands, clothing lines, and public figures around now are on the inspirational message train. Do people not realize they're being scammed? I am not your life coach, and my lyrics aren't supposed to be a guideline as to how you should live your life. This "you saved my life, you're my hero, and you're my voice" thing has become an unbearable burden and a downright eye roller. No, I did not save your life. No, band X, Y, or Z did not save your life. If, in fact, you were on the brink of any self-harming action, it was you who pulled yourself from the ledge. You saved your life. You are the hero. Why are people not willing to take credit for their actions? That's right, because that's what fans think bands want to hear. And to his point about don't the fans realize that they're being manipulated? Well, remember, the audience for this stuff was not adults who we can expect to see through this stuff. It was kids, like 15-year-olds. who see the guys in bands as almost like superheroes or something. And I think a lot of people, such as Chris, were kind of getting fed up with the whole savior core thing. So when Matty Mullins, the singer of Memphis May Fire, said this, it really did not go over well.
When I was growing up, my friends and my family and my teachers, they did not believe in me. And my school counselor pulled me aside and she said, Matty, I see no direction. What do you want to do with your life? And I said, ma'am, I'm gonna be the voice of a generation.
Especially because this isn't like a one-time thing that he stupidly blurted out one day. Like, this was pre-rehearsed stage banter that he said every single day on Warped Tour. A bunch of people in the other bands on Warped Tour kind of rolled their eyes about it publicly and privately, with probably the best example of that being, if you know the Issues song Personality Cult, it's actually about this.
Fuck the voice of a generation. I just wanna be who I am.
And a few years before that, they had this song called Jezebel, which was this super weird, cringy song about female fans who like use their sex appeal to prey on band guys. I'll read you a couple of my favorite lines. She's on the prowl, she wants it all, and she'll stop at nothing. It's obvious the stage is all that you see, so take your pick from the willing, but you'll never get me. I can feel her staring at me from across the room. She's got the worst of intentions, and she smells like trouble and cheap perfume. What? And to make matters worse, on that same Warped Tour, he went on this very, very misguided rant about how girls who go to Warped Tour shouldn't dress like sluts to try to tempt him because he's a married man.
This one goes out to every girl that never cared that I was married.
He got quite a bit of shit for that, and in my opinion, rightly so. And I think that really turned a lot of people off from the band. It came off as very judgmental and pompous and holier than thou, and I feel like that was kind of a momentum killer for the band, because after that, it was really kind of all downhill for them after that. So there's certainly a lesson to be learned here about humility and not letting your head get too big just because you're in the public eye and a few people think you're great. I don't think he's a bad guy at all. I think he probably just got a little bit ahead of himself, maybe believed his own hype a little bit and had the bad judgment to say some dumb shit on stage. And he's since then put his foot in his mouth and publicly acknowledged that. Second, he was probably like 23, 24 when he said that stuff, and I can't speak for everybody else out there, but I can say that when I was that age, and I think this is true for a lot of guys as well, especially guys, I was an absolute fucking idiot back then. And I cannot imagine the amount of incredibly stupid stuff I would have said if you put a microphone in front of my face and stood me in front of the thousands of people they played to on Warped Tour. I am certain I would have dug myself in a much deeper hole than Matty ever did. You would probably want people to give you a second chance, and as long as they learn from the mistake and they're willing to change direction, then I think we should do the same for people like Matty.
Imagine Dragons suck giant hairy monkey balls. The guitarist went on to state, please, no more calling this shittiest band on earth rock.
And lastly, Imagine Dragons. And this is an interesting one because I think they might actually be the band that I thought Nickelback was. With Nickelback, I was like, all right, this band's music is kind of bland and uninteresting, but what's the big deal? What's so bad about that? But then I dug a little bit deeper and I realized, all right, actually Chad Kroeger seems like kind of a douchebag who writes a bunch of really cringy, awful lyrics. And I was like, you know, I kind of get why people don't like him and by extension, the band. So when it comes to the band that everybody hates for some mysterious reason, even though they're really not that bad aside from having kind of bland generic music, Nickelback is not that band, but I think Imagine Dragons might be. Their music is what I call cartoon parrot music, which is really any music where you could easily imagine it being in the latest Pixar movie with a chorus of CG parrots wearing sunglasses and dancing to it. So I understand why people are not into their music. And the other thing is, from what I can tell, people seem to be turned off by the fact that the band is basically super blatantly commercial. They're on all these soundtracks, they license their music for commercials all the time, like they've done stuff with Microsoft, Jeep, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Nintendo, tons of other brands. According to this article, their song Believer has been licensed 32 times for movies and TV shows and commercials. I personally would never fault anybody for getting a payday. I mean, if you can get Microsoft to write you a fat fucking check for putting your song in a commercial, good for you, do it, get the bag.
You get the bag and fumble it, I get the bag and flip it and tumble it.
But I understand that I see things differently than a lot of people. A lot of people would say that's corny or it's selling out, and you know, they're not entirely wrong. It is corny. But all that being said, is it really that bad? Is playing bland music that gets used in Microsoft commercials such a terrible thing that it justifies writing articles like this about them? Imagine Dragons, congratulations. You're so shit, we've had to rearrange the official rankings of bands everyone has to hate for some reason. You are now number one. Nickelback, you're you're vindicated. That seems a little excessive to me, especially considering that from what I can tell, they seem like really decent people. I admittedly don't know a ton about them, so maybe there's some sort of dark thing that they did or said that I'm not aware of, but from looking at the singer's Instagram at least, he seems like a genuinely thoughtful, nice guy who's basically just into hanging out with his family. So I was kind of puzzled, like, yeah, I get why you don't like Imagine Dragons, but why do people hate them so much? What did they ever do?
And today's rant today is why I hate Imagine Dragons.
So I thought about it a little bit, and actually this paragraph from that same snarky blog article I read a minute ago, I think actually explains it, if you read between the lines. Painfully earnest in every way, they're the musical equivalent of a Poundland fridge magnet adorned with an inspiring phrase. You know the ones, shoot for the stars, even if you miss, you'll land on the moon. Or stars can't shine without darkness. Or whatever other trite bullshit your distant cousin is peddling via their kitchen ornaments this week. Or as Spin said, they're by definition the ideal accompaniment to a college football game. That article isn't wrong. I think that's an accurate way to characterize the band, and I think that is why people hate them so much. I think it's the fact that they seem to be really sincere, genuine people that just don't have an ounce of like snark or cynicism or darkness anywhere to be found. And that really makes a lot of sense if you consider the fact that they're a Mormon band. Or maybe not officially a Mormon band, I don't know about that, but they're at least from a Mormon background. And if you have been around Mormon people very much, that's pretty much how they are. They're kind of like real life Ned Flanders. And for some reason, there's a certain set of people that just absolutely hate that. And that set of people happens to be the exact same kind of people who oftentimes end up being music critics. I'm painting with broad strokes here, it's not exactly right, but I think what it comes down to is that the artsy personality type does not get along well with the like happy normie personality type. Like I remember the graphic designers I used to work with would always complain about this one girl who was pretty much always cheery, happy, sunny, smile on her face, super nice person, never had a bad thing to say about anything. And all the designers hated her. They were like,
why is she so happy all the time? She's so annoying.
So I think that article was right. They are the musical version of that fridge magnet with the inspirational slogan on it. But is that so bad? I mean, if you're not into their music, I completely get that. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't be. It is generic, bland, corporate rock. But when it comes to writing these like multi-paragraph hate essays on Imagine Dragons or calling them the worst band of all time, that seems a little excessive to me. And the larger question to me is this: if it makes you so angry that somebody is sincere and earnest and lacks cynicism, if that pisses you off, what does that say about you? It really shouldn't make you angry that other people are sincere.
Move over, Kardashians. Slayer and Exodus guitarist Gary Holt has a new target for his vitriol.
All right, everybody, that does it for this edition of Most Hated Bands. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about these bands? Do you think I got it right as far as why people hate them? And what bands would you like to see in future editions? Also, if you haven't, please check out the Punk Rock MBA podcast. There's a new episode every Wednesday, and there's a link to that in the description. Number two, if you want to talk about business with me, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I've been publishing a lot of stuff over there, especially about how to market yourself on social media. There is a link to that in the description. And lastly, number three, I would like to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. I am sincerely grateful for each and every one of you. It's because of you that we're able to do a lot of stuff, but especially the podcast. Because of the people on Patreon, I was able to hire a producer and editor who makes the whole thing possible. She's amazing. So thank you very much to all the patrons. If you are interested in supporting on Patreon, there's a link to that in the description. There's an opportunity to have me review your band or podcast or YouTube channel, graphic design portfolio, any other kind of creative project you want to send my way. So if that sounds interesting, check out the link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.